You're welcome back to Sahara TV. With me in the studio today, Namwali Serpell. Namwali Serpell is the winner of the 2015 Caine Prize for African Writing. She's also an associate professor of English at University of California, Berkeley. Namwali has made news in recent times for doing something exceptional, deciding to share her prize money with the runners-up who were in the race with her. She has also said quite some interesting things about the prize itself and the competition, and we are honored to have her here to speak to us about that and some other things, literature. Thank you very much for coming in the studio, Namwali.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so first of all, congratulations.
Thank you.
Are all over the news. Congratulations.
Thank you.
How was it? How was the journey like?
It was wonderful. I'd been shortlisted before in 2010, so it was familiar territory for me to a certain extent, but it was 10 very enjoyable, exciting days in London with the other shortlisted writers. It came as a big surprise to me that I won, so it's been quite a whirlwind since then.
Why was it a surprise that you won?
The story is a bit strange. A lot of readers find it puzzling and a bit oblique. So I just didn't know if it would appeal to everyone on the panel of judges. Yeah, and they didn't really tip their hand or let me know that I was going to win, so it was quite a shock.
Would you say it's a vanguard? Your work has been described in so many different words, but the sum of it is that it's avant-garde. Would you say that?
I mean, avant-garde is one way to put it. I think it's experimental, and I think it is surreal in some ways. I was very interested in trying to explore the relationships between these characters, much more than exploring them as individual people. So this kind of sense of not knowing who is who and what is happening was key to me, because I wanted to zoom in really on the relationship between them.
Okay, so that short story with which you won the Caine Prize is called The Sack.
Yes. Sum
it up for us in about 2 paragraphs.
Well, if I could do that, I wouldn't have written the story. But it's about 2 men who've known each other their whole lives, and they started a political movement together when they were young, and they both loved the same woman who died, giving birth to a child that may have been one of theirs or the other. So it's a bit of a love triangle, but the situation now is that these men are quite a bit older, and one is taking care of the other, who is quite sick. And a young boy comes into their household, and this opens up all of these secrets and emotions between them.
Now, a lot of writers would say they got the inspiration or the idea for a story from something or the other.
Yes.
Where did the inspiration for such a complex plot come from?
Well, it comes from many different sources, so maybe that's why it's complicated. I was inspired by a short story by Roberto Bolaño, the Chilean-born Mexican writer. I was inspired by a Japanese horror movie called Audition, which revolves around a sack. And I was inspired by, a particular book of folk tales about Zambia, and specifically one story about the problem of white ants. And if you have white ants in your house, it's supposed to be a kind of omen. So those things...
Good or bad?
Bad. So these things all came together in a kind of swirl. And I'd also had a dream when I was about 17 years old about a sack, and I didn't know whether I was inside it or outside of it, and I found that quite disturbing. So I wanted to write about that as well.
Interesting. And after you won the prize, you decided to share the money with
my shortlisted, fellow shortlistees.
Why?
I made that decision a few days before the prize, and it really had to do with the strangeness of being in a context where you're really supporting each other, you're really encouraging each other. The five of us were, going from panel to panel, being interviewed together, but we were also socializing, talking about books, about our families. And then to have this competitive structure kind of imposed on us was quite disconcerting to me. And it didn't seem to suit the atmosphere between us. I don't think that literature is really a competition. And for me, because I have a job, and I've had a job for quite some time, I'm a grown woman, I wouldn't say that everyone has to do this if they win a prize, but for me, I knew that I could. So I said to myself, in the unlikely event that I win this prize, I think I will share this prize with my fellow writers.
That's a first, isn't it? I've not heard of anybody do that.
Yes, apparently it's a common thing at the Caine Prize that, over drinks, someone will propose, we should all just split the money, but no one ever does it. So I'm the first one. I feel a bit foolish, but
no, you are a hero.
Oh,
I mean, I think among the many things that have come up out of you winning the prize, that actually stands out a lot. The fact that you were so selfless in sharing, and it's not just the money; it's also acknowledging that the talent is also like all these people are also like really talented people that we could. And like you rightly said, the competition doesn't do justice to all of that. But let me ask you though, why then did you enter the competition in the first place if you're so against it?
Well, the thing about the Caine Prize, which is interesting and is true for a lot of prizes, is that none of the writers are actually responsible for entering the competition. We're nominated by our publishers. So it came as a surprise to me that I was nominated. And I think 3 of us this year had been shortlisted previously. And I think all 3 of us, and one of us, Shegun Afolabi, had won before. And so we were quite surprised, but it was a matter of our publishers saying, these are really good stories, and they nominate them. So that process is the same every year.
Okay, so you said a while ago that one of the elements that influence your writing is folklore.
Yes.
How popular is Zambian folklore in Zambia? And then, does it have a future? Are we preserving folklore, or is it just going to fizzle out with the, obviously oral tradition going out of fashion?
It's still very, I think, very common and very popular. It's very much part of just the way people talk about their lives and talk about their relationships in Lusaka. But I think what's interesting is that there's always been a real kind of combination or amalgamation of different cultural beliefs in Lusaka. So you'll have, for example, there's an animistic belief system called Chinyao or Nyao that's practiced by the Chewa people who speak Nyanja in Zambia. And it incorporates elements from, what we call witchcraft, but also elements from Christianity, but even elements from the colonial period and sometimes even of like Kung Fu. So all of these different things come together, and they last because they remain part of our practice. But I do think there's some efforts to try and record some of them. The story I was discussing earlier about white ants comes from a book, a collection. So there are efforts, I think, among Zambians to write these things down so that we do preserve them.
Okay. Now you're Zambian and you live in the United States.
Yes.
I am reliably informed that you travel quite a fair bit to Zambia.
Yes.
What do you go to Zambia to do?
Well, my parents moved back to Lusaka in 2002. So my sister, who is also an academic in the US, we go back home pretty frequently. So we were just home this summer my sister was there for a month, I was there for about 2 weeks. I was home in January as well, and I'll be going home again in September. So I'm going to visit family because most of my family is there. But I also am going home to do research. I'm writing a novel that's set in Zambia. And so when I've been going on recent trips, I've been spending time in the archives and interviewing friends and family just to get the stories from the 60s and 70s, which is what I'm writing about.
So does living in the United States affect the way you write? And let me add to that question. Have you written anything that is set in a non-African setting?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I at this point, I've lived a long time in the US, and I have short stories that are set in the States. Two published stories. One is called Bottoms Up, and the other one is called The Book of Faces, which is about Facebook. So that one's kind of set on the internet.
Interesting.
But I also have, you know, Muzungu and The Sack, which are published in the West, but are set in Zambia. So I write stories that are set in both of the places that I live. Yeah.
Are you familiar with the term Afropolitan?
I am, yes, yes.
What's your take on Afropolitanism?
Well, so my former classmate, Taye Selassie, came up with this term in an article she wrote called Bye Bye Baba that I read a long time ago, actually, before the term really began to circulate. And I have a lot of respect and admiration for Taye and for what she's done to popularize this sense that Africans can move around, that we, you know, can inhabit different spaces and different cultures. You know, a lot of us are bicultural or even biracial. For me, Afropolitan, in a sense, is a term that seems new, but is actually very old. I feel like Zambia especially has been a kind of place where cultures have intersected and where people have immigrated and migrated for so many centuries that to me it's almost like we've always been Afropolitan. So to me it's not such a new concept.
So let's talk about the politics of Zambia right now. Does your writing reflect the politics of Zambia, or are you more interested in just the social aspect of the people's existence?
That's a good question. I think I am more interested in the social aspects and the cultural aspects, but as I said, you know, the SAC is about a failed political movement. So one of the things that I want to, in a sense, parody is the way that politics can emerge in these cycles of hope and despair. So I'm very interested in the emotions people feel around politics. You know, we have a very thriving democracy in Zambia. We have, a lot of people read the newspapers and a lot of people vote. And our elections are always a very exciting time. But I'm interested in the way that that often gets followed by this period of real disappointment. Will this one be corrupt this time? Or will this one be? And we seem to cycle through presidents quite rapidly these days. So I'm interested in more in an abstract sense, but also in just how people on the ground feel politics rather than how the politicians themselves behave.
So does the African writer, though, have a place in Africa's politics? Do we, I mean, do African writers have any role? Do they shape it? Are they playing enough of a role to shape the politics, since it affects everything else in Africa?
I think especially nonfiction, you know, so like one of the shortlisted writers this year, El Nathan John, he writes satire, political satire. He writes nonfiction as well as fiction. And I think, you know, journalistic reportage is very important to the political atmosphere. This is how we get our news. This is how we find out what's going on. I think the role of the African writer, you know, when we were decolonizing was much more important because we really needed to represent our newly formed nations to the rest of the world. Now I think things are a bit more complicated. There's many more people writing, there's many more people reading, and so I think you can't separate politics from literature, but I think as writers, we have different goals now. We're freer. We're more free to experiment, to do things with style, to aim just for beauty and not necessarily for political agendas.
Does that kind of suggest that Africa has moved from the age of that kind of revolution mentality to perhaps a more content, you know, disposition?
I mean, obviously not, right? But I think this is one of the problems of talking about Africa as a whole, right? So we have very, very urgent political questions in different countries in Africa. But the questions in Zambia right now are not the questions that are in Nigeria. They're not the questions that are in South Africa. They're very different. So you know, I think different African writers might have very different perspectives on their particular country and on their role. For me, as a Zambian, I'm mostly interested in capturing the specificity of my country, which is you know, it's the country people forget sometimes, you know. We're there in the middle. We're pretty peaceful. We've never had a coup,
Yeah,
you know.
that's right.
So I'm interested in explaining what it is to live just as a normal person in my country.
Do you think this will help to perhaps explain why Zambians are such lovely people? I'm saying this from a personal experience. Everywhere I've been and met Zambians, they are some of the most amazing people you ever met.
Thank you.
Yes, including Nick Shaleshe, who's our sound person. He's
who
an
I just
amazing guy.
met. Yes.
But African comedians, actors, musicians, whatnot, seem to be in high demand. They've kind of barged out on the world scene with their trade, and some of them are making a living out of it. Not so much for African writers, wouldn't you say?
Well, I think things are slowly changing in that regard. You know, I think someone like Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, right, has achieved the kind of international success that she can create her own workshop in Nigeria, bring other writers to that workshop, help them get published, help them get nominated for prizes. So I think there are these small communities that are growing up, and I think, you know, the internet helps with that as well. There's an online magazine based out of Kenya called Halada that I think is just incredible. The work coming out of it is really amazing. So there's small little pockets. You know, we're moving toward an international platform, and people are taking notice, which I think is one of the reasons that something like the Caine Prize is so important.
But on a general scale, though, someone who decides to write for a living in Africa, what kind of chances do they have?
I don't think anyone decides to write for a living anymore anywhere, because, you know, I think in the 20th century, in the 21st century, most writers have another job. My other job is as an academic. I studied to become a literature professor so that I had a job, so that I could pay my bills, so that I can find the time to write in the summer holidays, the winter holidays. Everybody, you know, on the shortlist this year has another job of some kind. So, you know, I think writing has not been a thing you can sustain yourself on unless you're in a very small minority for a very long time.
Now, you mentioned the internet being a blessing to African writing. Is this really the case? Looking at audiobooks, for instance, that's like a revolution in publishing. Now, how much is Africa benefiting from this electronic revolution? Well,
you know, I think there are these small patches of, you know, development, but it's something that's very clear to me about when I was in Zambia, say in '95, when I was in secondary school for a year, and now, is that almost everyone has a cell phone, at least in Lusaka. And it can be the cheapest of cheap cell phones. They all have access to a cell phone. And so some people are, you know, are publishing things that you can read on your cell phone, whether or not you have access to the internet. There was an initiative a couple of years ago, I think it was Google was saying they were going to make all of Zambia have free Wi-Fi, but there was some sort of you know, requirement that you join Facebook or something. But I mean, so many people are connecting in these ways, and if it's not them, their family or their children or their friends have this way of connecting with each other. So to me, it seems like it's a really amazing platform, and it's in a lot of ways it's cheaper than printing paper books. So I think it's a revolution in the making.
Okay, social media, is it a blessing or a curse to African writing?
Well, you know, I used it as grist for my writerly mill, because I wrote a short story called The Book of Faces, which is about Facebook. And it's a parody in a lot of ways. It's a critique of the kinds of confessional tendencies that people have when they're on Facebook. So the premise of it really is that someone is mourning on Facebook. He's talking about how his father has passed away, how his brother has passed away. And people are trying to respond to this, but it's quite odd because they're far away from this person. They're not really sure what's actually happening in his life. And what I was really interested in is the distance that it can breed. So for me, it's a very exciting thing because I could use it as a template to experiment with the short story form.
I could talk to you forever, Namwali, but unfortunately our time is up. Before we go though, let me ask you, where is African literature heading in this century and beyond?
I mean, I think it's heading in the direction all literature is, which is just to always push the boundaries of what literature can do, whether that's in terms of who we reach or what kind of language we use or what kind of form we use, who our audiences are, women, brown people, black people. I think we're just constantly pushing against the limits that are placed around literature.
Thank you so much, Namwali Serpell, and congratulations once again.
Thank you.
For winning that much coveted prize.
Thank you.
Thank you even more so for coming in here to speak with us live. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This has been Namwali Serpell, Associate Professor at UC Berkeley, and winner of the 2015 Caine Prize for African Writing. Stay tuned. This is SaharaTV. We'll be right back with more.